So we are ready now, I suppose. We have everything ready. Yes. Λοιπόν, καλημέρα σας, αγαπητοί φίλοι και φίλες, εκδότες, επαγγελματίες του βιβλίου και άνθρωποι που αγαπάτε τα βιβλία. Είμαστε σήμερα εδώ στην δεύτερη μέρα της έκθεσης και του επαγγελματικού προγράμματος που οργανώνουμε σε αυτό το πλαίσιο και έχουμε τη χαρά να υποδεχτούμε εδώ στην 21η Διεθνή Έκθεση Βιβλίου Θεσσαλονίκης έναν πραγματικά έτσι ενδιαφέροντα και σημαντικό άνθρωπο που έχει δημιουργήσει καινοτόμα προγράμματα χρησιμοποιώντας την τεχνητή νοημοσύνη για την προώθηση των βιβλίων προς το αναγνωστικό κοινό. Είναι ο Ναντίμ Σαντέκ που είναι εδώ μαζί μας σήμερα και θα μας παρουσιάσει τον τρόπο που έχει σκεφτεί να χρησιμοποιήσει την τεχνητή νοημοσύνη για να αναλύσει το DNA των βιβλίων. Αυτά για εμάς που δεν είμαστε πάρα πολύ της τεχνολογίας, αλλά περισσότερο το βιβλίο, ακούγονται λίγο μαγικά και λίγο κάπως. Και γι' αυτό μας ενδιαφέρει πάρα πολύ να μάθουμε τι είναι αυτό λοιπόν και πώς μπορούμε να το χρησιμοποιήσουμε για να είναι προς όφελός μας, για να ωφεληθούμε όλοι, τα βιβλία, οι συγγραφείς, οι αναγνώστες. Και λοιπόν, αγαπητέ Ναντίμ, επειδή έχεις και ένα πολύ ενδιαφέρον... So, yes, of course you did it, but... Okay, my dear. Θα πω απλώς ότι ο τίτλος της εκδήλωσης είναι «Μια εκτίμηση για τον μετασχηματιστικό αντίκτυπο της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης στην εκδοτική βιομηχανία».
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Gosh, maybe that's the only applause that I'll get. We'll see. Thank you all for coming. I'm just curious, how many of you use AI like every day or every week? If you just stick your hands up. Any of you never use AI? A few, yeah. And are you mostly publishers or authors or what? Where are you coming? How many publishers here? And authors? And other creatives of any type? Okay, so great, excellent, really interesting. Talking about AI is not always very safe. I wrote an article in the bookseller. Normally it's downloaded by about 2,000 readers, and an article I wrote had 2.5 million downloads, and then I got 10 death threats because I was talking about AI and publishing. So, are any of you crazy? I need to understand before we begin. Anyway, let's begin. The presentation, if you're curious, is completely assembled by AI. So I've stopped using PowerPoint. I've used PowerPoint for 30 years, and the last year I've stopped using it. I use something called Gamma, where you put in the things that you would normally put into a PowerPoint, perhaps simpler, and it does all the arrangements for you, does all the... Every visualization you'll see here is also done by AI, including, I thought that was quite pretty, that was done by AI. It was kind of, you know, walking through into a Greek bookshop. So it does these things remarkably well, and it's helpful, I find. You can judge the quality of the presentations as we go along. But here I just asked for a mixed group of Greek-looking publishers sitting around, you know, and it produced that. So I don't know if you identify with the picture or not, but... Anyway, it's nice to have you all here. I think it's very important just to set the tone before I begin. And what I want to say is that I'm a real optimist about AI, at least in publishing. I'm anxious about AI in military areas, in biological warfare, in robots, and there are lots and lots of really valid concerns about AI. I think in publishing, we know that the big issue is the misuse of copyright, the theft of copyright, the unauthorized use, at the very least, of copyrighted materials. I'm not going to talk about it a lot because we all know that's the big issue. And what I want to say just at the start is that my own view, I'm also an author, so I kind of wear two hats. One is the CEO of an AI company, the other one is as an author. So I'm quite concerned, and I hear both sides of the argument. But my own view is that there has to be a global recognition system of who creates things and there has to be a global remuneration system of who creates things. And we all have to have the choice of whether our work should go into AI or not. That's my position, if anybody's curious about it, because I think, people are sometimes uncomfortable. If you guys who just arrived want to come forward, a lot of it's on the screen, and you'll never see it from down there unless you've got binoculars. So, what I say to people is that you need to brace yourselves. This is a very, very fast-moving technology. We saw the arrival of the internet, we saw social media, we saw browsers. We all got used to the pace that these things arrive. Even TikTok was amazing when it came. Within a year, I think it had 1 billion users. So that was fast, but this is much, much faster, and it's accelerating. The other thing is that it's taking exponential leaps. It's not just little bits. It is getting more and more competent. And there's one, I don't know if it's a validated statistic or not, but if we think that the average human intelligence is about 100 IQ, it's said that AI is roughly at 130 at the moment. By the end of the year at about 1,000, and the end of next year by about 1 million. So this kind of super intelligence, which we can't comprehend in a way, is arriving much faster than most people think it is. So I would suggest that you engage with it, because it's going to be everywhere. It's going to be pervasive in all of our lives. I trained as a psychologist and a philosopher initially, and I sometimes wonder what it is that's going on when we relate to AI. And I think there's two things, the next two slides. The first one is that human beings do two things. We feel and we think. That's basically the way humans work. And we feel really fast and actually very accurately. And we think actually quite slowly and sometimes not so accurately. And we've spent decades now trying to promote objectivity, rationality, thoughtfulness. And of course, those are good things. But actually, the more inherent, the more distinctive characteristic of the human being is to be able to feel your way to things. And so what we notice about AI is it doesn't feel. So when people say, is AI going to replace human beings? I always go back to the feeling thing. It doesn't feel. It can pretend to feel, but it can't originate feelings. It can't act on feelings. It only simulates feelings. And that's probably the way it's going to stay. On the other hand, I don't know whether any of you have prompted an AI and just been astonished by how quickly it responds, how long it responds, how well it writes. It's like, how do you do that? Unbelievable. So we're kind of mesmerized by this intelligence that's arrived that can do what we try to do even faster. So I think what we're going to see is a lot more thinking done by AI and no feeling, and a lot more feeling done by human beings. I think that's a great thing for creativity. I think it's a great thing for publishing. I think it's an interesting thing for decision-making globally, because we see quite a lot of feelings around at the moment. The other thing that I wanted to mention is what I call survival machines. There's a Canadian neuroscientist called Steven Pinker, who wrote lots of books, but one of them is called The Better Angels of Our Nature. And in it, he describes the way every species on Earth thinks it's the supreme species, the apex species. And it tries to have offensive strategies and defensive strategies to ensure that it is the best. Now, human beings have basically won that. Maybe not physically always, but largely we have won on Earth. We are the apex genome currently. When AI came along and we looked at it, and we were threatened, I think in a kind of primal, primitive way, we thought, that's a real challenge to our apex status. And it's true. But the thing about species trying to be the supreme species is that they have a volition to do so. They have a strategy to do so. We don't know, and of course we can all have science fiction fears, that AI wants to be and will be built to be the most dominant intelligence on Earth, and that it'll run the Earth and we'll all be its servants. But there's no evidence that that's the way it's being built or that's the way it's evolving. So I think if you have fear of AI, some of it is quite primal because this thing is amazing and we haven't seen anything like it before, so we don't know how to accommodate it. We'll also see it in lots of different ways. So societally, if you think about it, and I don't mean to be an economic revolutionary now, you've had enough of that in Greece, but if AI can do your work, or help you do your work in half the time, let's say, it's probably less than that. If you can do your work in half the time, will we stop identifying as the CEO of an AI company, or a publisher, or a creative, or a lorry driver, or a barista, and instead we start identifying by what we do with the other half of our lives that we've recovered? Because, and this is a quite pessimistic view, we spend about 20 years learning, about 40 years working, and then 20 years slowly becoming irrelevant. You know, it's a pretty terrible kind of way. I'm in the irrelevant period already. So, and AI can change that. You know, there's a lot more what they call silver working now, where people who had become unable to keep up with skills are suddenly easily able to keep up because AI is helping them to understand what they're doing. And we might have a very different way of valuing our worth in society quite soon. Philosophically, what are we here to do? What are we doing with our time? And professionally, there's almost no workflow that won't be affected. People say, oh, but what about the guy in his tractor, you know, doing agriculture? AI has taken pictures from satellites and said, put more fertilizer here, but less there. You know, it's pervasive. It's absolutely everywhere. And from a historical perspective, I find it quite interesting, you know, my own business, and I'll tell you a little bit about it later on. We create advertising for books using AI. And when we launched almost 2 years ago, I would hear people, you know, being polite to us, but I would hear them saying to each other, oh, the ads look very AI. And they did. They looked like they were made by AI. I've noticed in the last 6 months that I almost never hear that anymore. And the reason is we're habituating, we're accommodating a new aesthetic. You know, we didn't have photography, we didn't have painting, we didn't have synthesized music. You know, even a Stradivarius violin was an artificial piece of music making. We keep habituating to new aesthetics, whether they're visual or oral or otherwise. And that's happening with AI. We're beginning to not say, oh, it's not very good because it looks AI. We're just saying it looks a bit AI. We know that was made by AI. And sometimes that's not possible. But I think it's a false measurement to say AI is only good when it looks just like a photograph. That's not the way it's going to go. There'll be lots of new things which are basically in this new aesthetic. And we've seen this coming many times with lots of the other technologies that have come along, from synthesizers to cameras. One of the things that I found that I say that people tell me is controversial, and they get upset by me saying this, but I'm still going to say it, is that I think everybody on Earth, 8 billion of us, are creative in some way. I think there's a separation of creativity from craft. You know, your ability to write well, your ability to paint, your ability to sing or make music. You know, we're lucky, or to build a bridge, or to, you know, identify a new molecule in biology. You know, these are all craftings that we do. Some of us are lucky to be good at crafting, others need help. But it doesn't mean that we don't all have a creative view. And the very last thing I ever advocate for, in fact, I'm opposed to it, is writing books or anything serious with AI. That's the last and the worst use of AI. But creative collaboration, helping you to identify what your idea is, arguing it with you. I write a regular column, and every time I write the column, I probably do 2 drafts, sometimes 3, then I think that's good. And then I give it to AI and I say, contradict me, tell me why my argument is weak. And always it humiliates me and tells me how I could make my article better. That's helpful. You know, I don't think that's cheating. I think that's giving people a better column when I finally publish it. And all of us can do that. So, you know, you imagine that you want to create a new sort of music or a new kind of game, or, you know, you have a new creative idea altogether. Iterating it as a creative collaborator with AI is a really helpful thing to do. And I think we're going to see many more voices. The thing that's interesting about this is that there are many unexpressed creatives around, inarticulate creatives. And to be able to understand what they are bringing to the world, I think is a treasure for us all. I think it's a fortune that we didn't expect to see. and I think we should enjoy and welcome it. Discussing the nature of creativity is a pretty difficult task. And I don't mean to pretend to have some sort of magic definition of what creativity is. But what I've noticed about it is that pretty well all creative things are interconnected, meaning that every work you see somehow, either implicitly or explicitly, builds upon something that the artist has seen or experienced previously. We absorb things. We assimilate things. They become part of our way of thinking, part of our values, and we choose some and we discard others. So we all have our own little ecosystems of values. We remix things all the time. We reinterpret things, and we synthesize lots of these things together. And when you come to the human element within it, I think inspiration, which is a difficult thing to identify and to define, I suppose, specifically, but it's about those intangible sparks that somehow you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you write something down on a little piece of paper next to your bed, and that's your inspiration, which you then develop later. And it comes to people in showers. It usually comes to people when they are not thinking. That's the interesting thing. So inspiration normally happens when you're not thinking. It just arrives. It's normally got emotional depth, true human creativity, where you can feel the feelings expressed by the creative. And it's got a personal touch where an individual perspective has been brought. In publishing, I think we're on a journey from increasingly confident adoption of AI for corporate efficiency. I'll explain that in a minute. And we're much more hesitant about adopting AI for creative emancipation. It's a journey, I think, from efficiency to emancipation. And as you get closer to emancipation, it becomes more exciting. But that's really where we're going. And I think what will happen is that we will move from this kind of corporate profitability, how do we manage our warehouses better, how do we do our logistics better, how do we qualify manuscripts faster, to a means of helping creatives to express themselves more fully. And just a quick reflection, I've often looked at publishing and thought, almost since Gutenberg, publishers are providers of technology to authors, whether it's printing or publishing or, distribution or, rights management or payment systems. There's a lot of technology provided. And I think if it wasn't for the big battle about copyright, publishers would already be thinking about how they could provide their authors with an appropriate AI that helps them to be creatively augmented, to be to collaborate better, the publisher and the author. And I think eventually we will get to a place where we realize potential in people who haven't even started to express their creativity yet. So what are the efficiencies? It's things like manuscript qualification. My sister-in-law worked as a literary agent, and it's a few years ago, but she said the terrible thing was they got so many manuscripts that they were all piled up in the corridor of the office, and at the weekend they all took as many as they could under their arms. They gave them to their friends, and on Monday morning they got them back from kids who were drunk at the weekend who read a bit of the book and said, yeah, this one doesn't seem very good. I mean, it's such an unfair system when it was like that, and I know that publishers wouldn't like that to be the case, or literary agents wouldn't say that is still the case. But we can now do it with AI, where the AI reads the scripts and says, look, this one is this genre and it's similar to that sort of author, and these are the strengths and the weaknesses. So if you want those sorts of ones, they're over there, and if you want these ones, they're over here. It's a helpful way of doing things. Rights and royalties are being, like lots of legal things, are being streamlined a lot at the moment by AI. Supply chain optimization, and particularly sustainability, and then editing and proofing. I'll tell you a little bit more about editing because I've just finished writing a children's book. I've had an editor-in-chief of Penguin Random House look at it, and she's given me all of her feedback on it. And then she said, I want you to try this AI editing software. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. But I'll tell you that story a little bit more in a minute. But we're seeing editing being impacted by AI as well. I think the other kind of efficiency is that you can have predictive publication. So you can either say, we see, because AI has helped us to see these trends coming, and therefore we're going to commission this kind of writing in particular. Or you can go back through your whole backlist your whole catalog and say, because these trends are here, we can now resurface these particular things. And it's just a very efficient way of sieving and streamlining. The emancipations, I think, are about the new writings and the new expressions that we're going to see. The new expressions, what will they be? I don't know. You know, I've got 4 children. The youngest one is a Gen Z. The other ones are a little bit older. He doesn't read anything. He doesn't seem to do anything. But he's very creative and he's very sensitive. So he games all the time and he listens to music all the time. He might create a new art form, which is a mashup, a synthesis of a game, music, maybe some poetry that he writes, a crypto payment system, and something else that we haven't seen before. You know, AI enables a lot of these things to happen with a website and a payment system that works and all the rest of it. So I think we're going to see new expressions coming that way. And I think we'll see the flourishing of new forms, pushing limits, getting things augmented in a way that you couldn't previously anticipate doing. And I keep saying this to people, that if you're not engaging with AI, you are really quite likely to be falling behind faster than you believe you are. So even if you're just doing something as trivial as going onto ChatGPT, I mean, there's so many, you know, you could use DeepSeek, you can use Claude. I use probably a dozen different AIs most days just to keep abreast of all the different ones that you're doing. But engage, you know, interact with them, see what happens. They really are different from each other, and they do different things in different ways. And you can already begin to see the cultural impact of where they come from. So Chinese ones are different from Middle Eastern ones, which are different from American ones, and there aren't many European ones. But Mistral from France also has a bit of a French feeling already. So it's worth experimenting and evolving rather than thinking that you can avoid the whole thing. You don't have to make it your life. You don't have to become an AI crazy person. But I would advise you to engage at the very least and to experiment. And within creativity, what is the human role in AI? Because we looked at the human in creativity a minute ago, but what about AI creativity? Well, it's having a vision. It's being able to identify emotion. It's curating, and it's interpreting. These are critical kind of human faculties that make the creation of work with AI much more valuable and much more appreciated by people when they come across it. And I just want to tell you about a few different technologies I've come across in the last couple of months. There's a business called Sinai AI that hasn't launched yet, but they've been buying rights to books. And what they're doing is converting the scripts into ebooks, but an AI form of an ebook. And what you can do with that is just very simply, if you're reading it and you want to get up and walk your dog or whatever, you press the button and it becomes an audiobook. But while you're walking, you listen to a paragraph or a chapter and you say, that's complete rubbish, and I know that'll really annoy Noppy if I send it to her. So you speak to your book and you say, please send this chapter to Noppy and tell her that I think it's really annoying. Does she agree? You know, and it does all that for you. You can then come across a passage in the book that says, he was in a monsoon, and you think, is a monsoon the same as a typhoon? They sound the same, but I don't know the difference. And it illustrates it for you so you can see the difference between the two. And you can also get to the end of the book and say, actually, this is rubbish. I want a complete contradiction of this thesis. I disagree with what they're saying. Are there any other authors? And it goes and finds the authors that contradict this thesis, show you where to buy the book, give you a synopsis of it, and tell you if you want an alternative point of view, you can do it that way. So it's a multimodal interactive book that is much more attuned to the way most people nowadays are interacting every day. We see everywhere reading is in decline. We keep getting this data that says reading is in decline. And yet, although I love the printed book and look at them all around here, they're wonderful. And it's a unique experience to have nothing else going on and to, you know, stay up all night and to read the whole way through a book that you can't put down. That's a very special experience from a book. But most people aren't reading like that anymore. They're multimodal and they're interactive. And so I see a future for this kind of technology, particularly with younger readers. I wrote a book, which is now, I wrote it in English. It was published in Arabic just yesterday in Greek. It's coming out in Tamil, Mandarin, Spanish, Italian, Uzbek, and probably many others. And only 2 of those editions are being human translated, the Mandarin one and the Uzbek one. The rest, the publisher said, we need to change the equation for this book. It's a business book. It's about, how to use AI in publishing. So it doesn't have a huge audience, and the economics would make it impossible for it to be published in most places. But if you can change one of the variables, the cost of translating, then the publisher says, oh, and I can get the cover as well. Then you have a very different equation. And what has happened consistently is that we give them a translated manuscript, which is about 80% good, and then the editors spend between 2 and 4 days polishing it. So it's still, a hybrid. It's a human-machine hybrid translation. But the heavy work is done by the machines first. And it's done in a day, less than a day. So if you said to me today, I want a Romanian one, I could send you the Romanian translation of my book tomorrow. It really does change the way things are happening. So translation, I think, is going to give us much more accessibility. By the way, apart from my own anecdote about it, let's say that you're into Scandi noir, you like intrigue from Scandinavia, and somebody tells you, well, actually, there's a Mongolian writer that does a lot of that. You can't read Mongolian, but you can go and say, could AI please translate those Mongolian Scandi noir books for me? And even if it's only 85, 90% good, then you are accessing that author's work and they're sharing it with you in a way that was previously impossible. So, we all need to think about how much we accept that. The other thing is audiobooks. Again, as an experiment, because I keep doing these AI experiments, I suppose it's my job. I went into a production house that traditionally does audiobooks, and they said, we want to clone your voice and publish your book. So my book's 10 chapters long. I read 3 chapters. The machine copied me, and then they published it. And it's on Spotify, and it's on audio, on Audible, and lots of other platforms. And I was playing it, and I was thinking, did I do chapter 3 or chapter 4? And I asked my kids, and they couldn't tell whether I did chapter 3. So I rang the studio, and I said, which chapters did I record? They said 1, 2, and 4, but we didn't use it. We just did the whole thing with a synthesized voice. So, and not even my family could tell. A couple of words were pronounced differently and were a bit strange, but really only a couple of words. So I think that, enables... So my Greek publisher has said, can we use your voice to do the Greek edition of the audiobook? We'll do that in a day, with my voice again. You've probably had enough of my voice already, but there's more of it coming. I don't know whether this is a naive thought of mine I'm not a publisher, but premium editions, if what we're going to get are machine-enabled translations and audiobooks, it will become the case that the books that are done beautifully by actors or translated by wonderful translators and interpreters, where the art of articulation is really respected in literary fiction, for example, then that might be a new product, which is the really premium edition of any work done beautifully by actors and translators. I don't know if you remember the deluxe versions of CDs. They came out a bit like that with, much more from the artist and so on. So that's a possibility. Another piece of software that I've been working with that I found astonishing was something called Personify. So it's still the case, isn't it, that, when a book is launched, it's nice to go to the bookstore and have your launch, and some people come along, and you have a glass of wine, you sign a few books, and you chat. It's a very limited audience and a very small interaction that is brief, and it only happens once or maybe twice if you're lucky. What Personify does is it reads everything you've ever written. So it'll read your book, it'll read what you've done on LinkedIn, whatever you want to give it. For me, it'd be columns that I write and so on. And then it interacts with anybody. So they come along and they say, hey, Nadim, what do you think about, the sophistication of Swedish poetry or something like that? And if I've ever spoken about it, then this AI will talk back and have an interaction. So, of course, it's only an avatar. Of course, it's not actually me, but it gives people an ability to interact with the author in a way that is previously commonly impossible to do. Sure. we don't know for sure. I mean, there are rules and regulations, and you sign terms and conditions about how things are done, but it's a risk. You know, that we're all learning with this new technology how to control the risks, but for sure it's a risk. Yeah. I think it could also, you know, what does Nadeem think about the, you know, German military strategy? Like, I don't know. And of course it could pretend to talk like me. Yeah. But it's a really interesting way of accessing more around the life of an author. Editrix is an Indian startup that is doing AI editing, and it's been created by a veteran. She was the publisher-in-chief for Penguin Random House India, and she is a wonderful editor. So she edited my children's books, and then she said, I guarantee you that if you used Editrix, you would get a better, fuller, more nuanced guidance from the software. And I thought, you must be kidding, you're fantastic. You know, I love working with her. And I did it, and it's true. It was amazing what it picked up. So in one passage in one of the stories, I have a little boy coming from his house and going down through a local village. It's set in Malaysia. And the AI said to me, I can tell by the rest of your stories that you don't have a colonialist attitude, but this particular vignette could be misinterpreted by a reader as the white boy coming from his big house and walking through the local village and being superior. So please think about whether you want to continue writing it that way, or whether you want to evolve the script a little bit. And I thought, God, that's amazing. And it had dozens of these sorts of pieces of advice. So I was astonished by it, and it was so easy to use, almost immediate. So as an author, when you're feeling vulnerable and you don't know if your work's very good, you can do this privately in your own time, when you're in the right mind state to accept criticism and to evolve what you're working with. And if you're an editor, you can use it to help you to get through the things and then to pay attention to the big issues in the manuscript. Really interesting stuff. What Shimmer does, we've been around for about 18 months, is we use AI to understand what a book is. We do a profile of it, which we call book DNA. And that book DNA is structural, so we understand it's a book about fishing in Sweden. But we also do a psychological analysis of it. And we understand that actually it's a book more about melancholy, depression, cruelty. Weird book about fishing in Sweden. And so that book DNA becomes the creative brief for our generator. So the analyzer finds the book DNA, the generator produces ads that respect all of those ingredients: Sweden, fishing, melancholy, depression, cruelty. And then that campaign is handed to the third machine, the deployer, which then goes and finds audiences on different platforms, whether it's LinkedIn or Meta or Pinterest or Reddit, you know, dozens, wherever there's an audience that can be profiled. It then brings the ads and shows them to the people that like those sorts of qualities. And that results, I'll just show you some of them. So these, I mean, you know, lots of different genres. I know it's very small from where you're sitting there, but we produce all sorts of different genres. Some are photorealistic, some are not photorealistic deliberately. Kids' things look very different. You know, the machines are tuning up all the time to be more and more specific and sensitive to the genre that they're representing. And of course, what we're doing is we're taking everything between the covers of a book. We don't look at the cover, we don't look at reviews, we just take the author's work and we bring it to life with some advertising that's very specific. And it works. So our advertising is getting about 6 times more attention than the industry benchmark should. And it's then converting people to sales, to purchasing the book, at about 12 times the rate of normal advertising. And it's simply because the AI has helped us to find the psychological, the emotional hooks within the book and then represents them beautifully. And we're simply bringing the author's work to life. So we're now working with about 200 publishers. Some are very wary, some are very anxious about using AI imagery, others have just completely embraced it. So there's a whole spectrum of hesitation and confidence about doing this. Just so that you're kind of contextualizing this, I was asked by the Moroccan government to do a talk on AI in lots of creative industries, including music and film and games and so on. So I had to do a bit of studying of it. And actually what's true is that publishing is probably going the slowest in the adoption of AI. I think it's because of the copyright issue, that there's been so much debate and division and upset about it, that we've kind of got a bit stuck and a bit paralyzed by the conversation. But the other industries are really going very fast. So in music, you've got all sorts of composition tools. You probably can't see them, but Aiva and Boomi, they create and arrange tracks to your description. So this is where the craft and creativity thing comes back. You might have a very clear view of the sort of music you want to make, but you don't have the craft to make music. But you can be very specific about articulating what you want it to be and how, and it does that for you. It allows the musicians to focus on the emotion and the expression in their work. And we also have, things like Spotify's DJ already, working up new algorithms through AI. In filmmaking, we've got script generation going on. So you remember there's the Hollywood actors strike a couple of years ago. Actually, what's happened now is most of the studios have invested in big AI facilities, lots of them together. And they're doing amazing dubbing, amazing script generation. And 11 Labs is also very active in the filmmaking industry, where it's making narratives much more fluid across different genres. In gaming, I don't know if you know what an NPC is, but it's a non-participating character. So let's say you're walking past something in a scenario, and there's a doorman in a hotel. He might say good morning to you. Traditionally in games, he would always say good morning to you, good morning to you. So you go past him 100 times, good morning. But now, with AI, he'll say, you dropped something, or are you waiting for a taxi, sir? Or, it's nice weather today, isn't it? So it's kind of making it richer the whole way, even in these kind of quite subtle pieces of work. And then there's something called procedural generation, where you're walking through a game, and because of the way that you play the game, the AI says, well, he likes cliffs and waterfalls, so let's do a bit more of that. So it keeps iterating the game to your personality and your preferences. I think it's fascinating. And then you get kind of real live. There's a Turkish-American chap called Rafik Kanadol. He's been working with MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and also with the Walt Disney Center in LA. And in MoMA, he took all of the pieces of work and synthesized them with AI, with MoMA's participation. And now there's a dynamic presentation of a single piece of work that tries to represent all the pieces of work every day in MoMA, and it changes by the day. He's also done an installation at the Walt Disney Center where everything within Walt Disney is represented and dynamically changes with a light show on the outside all night through. So, different interpretations of art, different interpretations of creativity. There are legal questions. I'm beginning to come to the end now, and of course we can have lots of questions if you like. But there are legal questions about attribution. If AI is contributing to the work either creatively or, in the case of writing, actually writing any of it, where does the attribution go? Who owns the copyright and so on? There is clearly a risk with training data. I think it's almost impossible to work with anything now without AI having a look at it. Something that's not discussed much, even by the International Publishers Association, but I think is a really interesting subject, is that if you're using Word, or if you send a file by, let's say, and I mean Word and Google Docs and anything really online, or if you're using something like WeTransfer to send a file, while it's in transit, it's read by AI. So pretty well everything, even before it's published. So if you think you're writing your manuscript, and you have a right to retain its copyright and not share it with AI only when it's published, it's already been read. I mean, I write in Word, and I know that everything that I've written already has already gone into an AI, even before I publish it. So I don't know why that's not a bigger story at the moment, because it's a really tricky one. And it's quite hard to find software that says we won't harvest in transition, which is something that I think, is a real risk for us all. And licensing in terms, it's complex and you really do need to read it. We have to do it because we take manuscripts every day from publishers, and we have to guarantee that we're not losing it to an AI. We use AI on the scripts, we don't train AI with the scripts. And authenticity. Authenticity is really difficult to identify exactly, but we have to have a means of identifying more specifically where something has come from. We all need to evolve our skills, and I think we have to understand that the market dynamics are changing. I was told, again, perhaps an unverified statistics, but if you index link currency, then over history, over the last many, many decades, 1,000 words cost $400 produced. And now it's 4 cents. So, you know, the ability to generate text and to have things written has been completely commoditized, and that's changing the economics of publishing too. So the considerations are, as I said at the very start, let's get a fair compensation system in place. I don't make excuses for the way that big technology companies have stolen works. I think it's terrible, and you know, we'll see what happens in the courts eventually. But I think it's also true that if you're a young technology company trying to get the data that you need, dealing with a publishing industry that had never dealt with AI is very fragmented and probably doesn't have a legal framework for understanding AI, was probably pretty difficult. And I think that led to the way that the texts were taken so quickly and without permission. And we're now going back to, you know, fixing all of that. It's as if they stole 3 eggs to show you they could make a good omelet, and now they want to do a whole kitchen. So they're asking to buy them more eggs from you. And my own view is that we're at a new frontier for creativity, where we'll expand the 8 billion creatives into some sort of expression, which is fantastic. We'll transform the creative process, much more collaboration, much easier. Having private, vulnerable conversations as a creative with a collaborator is a really important part of your production process, and AI is really good at that. It's non-judgmental, doesn't get tired, it doesn't get cranky, doesn't tell you off. And innovation, I think we'll see new forms like the Gen Z mashup of a cryptocurrency and a game and a poem that I talked about. So I'll leave you with my most provocative thought, really, which is, if humans made AI, is it possibly the most creative thing we've ever done? Because we've distilled the entirety of human values and expressions, good and bad, into a thing that we can all access globally and interact with and understand. I think actually that the possibility is that AI makes humans more human. And that's going back to the feelings subject that I started with. So I hope some of what I've talked about has been helpful for you, or at least stimulating. And if you'd like to have any questions, then of course I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Hi. Is there another one?
I've heard that for AI technologies used a lot of water and electricity. Mm-hmm. What about that?
Yeah, I think there's a real sustainability challenge for sure.
It may cost 4 cents.
Yeah,
you said before.
Exactly.
But what does it do to our planet?
Yeah.
No, it's resources.
It's been a huge increase in energy consumption in the AI age. And they have to fix it. So I don't know if you've heard, I don't know if it's a good solution, but Google is building 7 atomic power plants, nuclear power plants, you know. Yeah. But you know, there are simple things you can do. So if you're doing something simple like, what's the time in London now? Don't use AI. Use Google. Yeah, I can see. Yeah. But just on the on the sustainability question though, specifically, if you're going to look something up, do it on Google if it's simple, because it uses about 1/20 of what happens if you use AI for the same question. Any other questions? Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for this insightful speech.
Pleasure.
I would like your thinking, your thought on that. AI can actually create whole books or papers, academic papers or literature, whatever, in seconds or in days, while human beings, we need months or even years to create stuff like that. Due to this situation, a lot of researchers say that in some decades from now, we're going to have more texts written by AI rather than human beings, compared to all the texts that we have written throughout the whole history of ours. So what's your thought on that? What do you think about this kind of ethical challenge that we might live in some generations from now in a cultural cocoon which actually is going to be created by non-human beings? Thank you.
It's a great and deep question. And honestly, I'm ambivalent about it. I have positive and negative feelings about it. So, I've been talking to a lot of academic publishers, and what's happening is two things. One is that they are producing AI compilations of lots of their research books, which makes them easier to access. So they're on an accessibility, drive to make the works that they already have just much more available and easily consumed. The other thing that's happening with those sorts of works is they're going into AI. They're being sold. So a lot of the academic publishers are doing the big deals for lots of money where they sell their scientific works. And so you can go to the AI and then learn just in the way that you would have done from a single book, from a single book, from a single book or publication. Largely, I think that's positive. I think, that's bringing the scientists' work to a larger audience more easily. I think when you get to there's a German company called Inkit. I don't know if you've heard about it, but Inkit will publish your book almost immediately, and then if it does well, they publish it on a bigger platform, and they monetize it more. And in your contract, you have signed to Inkit that they can then produce sequels, and they do that with AI. So you write one good book, and then they write 15 books, kind of imitating it, iterating it, developing it, making it a series, and they make money from that. And the authors don't make much money, and they don't have any creative control. I don't love that. And what I really don't love are just like random long books written by AI to a few prompts. But I think that's when we become, the feeling part that I talked about at the beginning, where we can navigate with our feelings really accurately. We can make decisions with our feelings. And I think we will know when we're looking at something or reading something, consuming something that is only simulating emotion or terror or intrigue or romance, and when it's truly heartfelt, as we might increasingly say. So in a sense, I'm not worried that human creativity will continue to be identifiable, discernible, and preferred, but I do believe that we're going to be surrounded, and we're going to have to do a lot more filtering as we go along, which is just boring. Finita la musica? Okay. Thank you very much for coming.